Oh, so thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. So I am up here with Jeannie Barton from the Better Business Bureau, Chris Olson from the FTC, Joe Turow from the Annenberg School at Penn, and Jane Yakowitz from Brooklyn Law School. Let me just start by asking everyone, I mean, it seems from what we've heard this morning, and certainly from what we've been seeing these last few weeks, that marketers and web companies and mobile app developers have almost an insatiable demand for data. They want as much information as possible, and many of them believe, and they might be right, that they use that data for purposes that benefit consumers, that they use that data to serve ads that are more relevant to consumers or to otherwise personalize content in ways that consumers would want. At the same time, it seems pretty clear that there are at least some consumers that don't want their data collected. The industry's response has been to say that there needs to be transparency and notice. And the self-regulatory program kind of hinges on this idea of telling people about online behavioral advertising through an icon and letting them opt out, or in some cases, getting their explicit consent, but usually letting them opt out from the data collection. So the first question I have, and I'm going to ask this to Joe first, is that enough to address the privacy concerns?
No, for a number of reasons. First, you have to look at the icon process. Rather few people go to it. And I'm trying to talk here from the perspective of you guys here, the marketers, and why you might be concerned about that. If I was just looking at the Digital Advertising Alliance page, and an unknowledgeable consumer going to that might say, why am I doing this? Because the first half of the page tells you there's absolutely nothing wrong. The description of what happens when behavioral advertising takes place is a unitary variable description. That is, for example, let's say you're a baseball player, and we may track you because you're a baseball player. There's no sense that there are hundreds of data points that people go together. And beyond that, I think the larger issue is, how do people have a relationship with their data? And more moving into the 21st century, we're going to be in a world where people are going to wonder what's going on. And if you have a minuscule percentage of people who engage with their data, but so many people who begin to say, what the heck is happening with the advertisements I get, the coupons I get, the news and entertainment I get, that's going to cause a kind of anxiety that I think marketers are going to rue in decades to come.
So, Jane, let me ask you, what is your perspective? Do you think that being transparent with consumers, telling them this is what we're going to collect and you can opt out if you don't want that collected, will that protect people's privacy?
Yeah, so I almost feel bad for this crowd because I'm a privacy scholar, and yet I'm very atypical among privacy scholars. I tend to be more on the First Amendment. Maybe marketers are happy to hear this, but I tend to be a thorn in the side of the average privacy scholar, and so most of my instincts probably match many of those of you in the audience. On the other hand, so generally speaking, I think consumers tend to fear innovations that they don't know, and we should not necessarily rush to satisfy concerns that are not well-founded or are not entirely rational. As a consumer, I have these fears too, but that does not necessarily mean that law should go there. On the other hand, there are some contexts in which I do think that current practices cause real and sort of immediate harms to the consumers that are avoidable and maybe perhaps ought to be targeted by law. Most consumers today still don't fully understand that their computer is generating a lot of data exhaust that can be collected or recorded into their cookies and essentially follows them around the web. They still think of surfing the web as an intimate, private activity. And I don't necessarily think that this is an entirely unreasonable expectation. If a consumer is typing in information to a company directly, then perhaps there they have sufficient notice that they are giving information to a company. But if they are simply reading an article on depression on WebMD, for example, they might not fully appreciate that WebMD knows not only that they visited WebMD, but that they visited the particular page on depression and could market to them on that basis. So much like Joe, I'm concerned that current notice practices are ineffective. On the other hand, if on the other hand, I do think that if notice were to be really given to the consumer, notice probably is enough to provide consent. I mean, if they are there under the understanding of a notice, then that's probably good enough.
So now, Jeannie, you've been out and investigating companies that say they follow the self-regulatory principles, but where problems have been found. So, I mean, let me ask you, do you think that companies are willing to, from what you've seen, that the web companies and players in the space are willing to provide notice and let people opt out?
Well, so far, we've had one set of cases published, and there were 6 of them. All 6 companies, as soon as we got in touch with them, said, oh, first of all, sometimes they had quickly expiring cookies. They didn't know they did in some instances. They didn't know they shouldn't. As soon as they knew that, as soon as they knew that they had links to their opt-out that were broken, they immediately wanted to get into compliance. We have another round of inquiries that are going on now. Companies have a little more time to get back to us, but 2 companies came back to us the next day saying, just tell me how to fix it.
Well, what about the edge rider problem, though? I mean, what about the companies that are just not part of the self-regulatory effort?
Here's what I keep saying. Everyone is part of our self-regulatory program. We cover the entire advertising ecosystem. We're not a membership organization for compliance the way NAI is, and I think on Mark's train, it's good to have both kinds of accountability. But we believe that self-regulation works only if the entire industry is involved, so that we are looking at those companies that are taking the risks.
So, Chris, let me ask you, if a company makes a promise to consumers that they will let them opt out of behavioral targeting or that they won't collect their data, and it turns out that they're not keeping that promise, the FTC can take and has taken action in the last year, right?
Yeah, we've done that in a couple of different cases in the ad industry context. We did that with a company that offered an opt-out but did not disclose that the opt-out expired in 10 days. So there were consumers who went and opted out, and unbeknownst to them, 10 days later, the opt-out cookie was gone and the data collection continued. We've also taken action in a case involving a company that was using flash cookies and indicating to consumers that the way to block tracking was to go to the browser settings and block third-party cookies, but the browser settings had no control over flash cookies. So there have been a number of cases that have prompted us to take action.
Can the FTC take any action if a company either doesn't belong to a self-regulatory group or doesn't have a privacy policy where they make promises to consumers?
You know, it depends. Certainly the FTC can take action if the company does not participate in a self-regulatory organization. And in many cases, companies, even if they are not NAI members or IAB or DAA, they may still make representations to consumers about what they do and do not do. Those representations are actionable under the FTC Act, which prohibits unfair or deceptive acts or practices. That statutory provision is what was the basis for the action I just described in the 2 cases. It's the basis for the action we took against Google and against Facebook. because of misrepresentations those companies, alleged misrepresentations those companies made to consumers about information sharing, about whether advertisers, for example, would get access to certain information on the Facebook site. In the absence of a privacy policy, it's also possible for the FTC to take action against a company, but that would require a finding that the action is unfair and would require a demonstration of likely injury, which is often a bit more complicated than simply looking at a representation of consumers and deciding whether it's truthful and accurate.
Jeannie, are you hearing from any companies out there that the marketers don't want to be part of this effort because they're afraid of legal consequences?
Well, we've had some instances of two things. One, where just a couple of anecdotal things, where a company, for example, a publisher brings a contract and says, we want to know before we sign on with you that you are going to comply with the DAA requirements. And the company with whom the contract is being negotiated, their lawyers saying, no way, we're not going to pledge to follow any kind of rules that we might slip up on contractually. That was brought to my attention. We would take that as a complaint if it got to that point and see if we had jurisdiction to do anything, but that's settled. And the company did comply. We have heard, without knowing who was involved, that ad networks were asked in the case of certain companies not to comply with the DAA requirements. That is rare because actually advertisers and brands are finding that they gain points with consumers when they take ownership of this. But again, I would say that we have an anonymous complaint system, and if any of you out there who want to comply should find yourself in a situation where your client doesn't want you to, we would urge you to tell us about it. You can tell us anonymously. You can tell us and then not be in the program. But one thing I will say, if you are responsible for notice and choice and someone asks you not to provide it, that weighs not at all with me because you're responsible for providing it. But I do want to emphasize that what I'm talking about are 3 anecdotal instances out of a sea of people.
Yeah. So, Joe, I want to go back to something you said about interest-based ads, which is that this is usually presented to consumers as if you're interested, if you read stories about baseball and you're interested in baseball, then we'll serve you ads for tickets to baseball games or subscriptions to sports magazines. But it seems like some of the types of targeting now are really going way beyond that. So there was an article a few days ago about political campaigns doing micro-targeting, and there was one example of how a campaign combined cookie-based data with voter registration records and other offline data. And this was, I think, Christie's campaign in New Jersey in 2009, and created a video and arranged to target just Republican women who had expressed an interest in reading about breast cancer stories. So that, I mean, it was a political ad. That seems to go way beyond what people think of when they think of if you're interested in a topic, you'll get an ad for that topic. Let me just ask, does that, what do you all think of that type of micro-targeting?
You're asking me?
Yes,
okay.
Everyone.
Well, okay. Obviously, I have a problem with people not knowing about it. I'm not against target marketing. I think target marketing is part of our lives today. You're not going to stop that train. What I'm against is people having no clue about how it works and no control over the data that they are giving up. I really do believe that people should have control over ideas that people have about them, and that this is part of respect that companies should have for the people they deal with, customers, whatever you want to call them, visitors. The issue is complicated. We've done surveys, a recent one with people in Berkeley, where a large percentage of Americans said that they do not want tailored advertising. And if we told them how this stuff is gotten, how the ideas about them are gotten, even larger percentages say no. The idea, it seems that Americans don't have a problem with controlling their own visions of what they want to see and how they want to be looked at. But when it comes to other people doing it, people do have a problem. I just want to add one more thing. The problem of how we define these terms, like edge riders, would you call a company that takes everything about you, uses it to make predictive measurements, as you just suggested, buys other material about you from people, and then adds that to the projections, then goes ahead and shares it or sells it without your knowledge, or at least without a lot of people knowing about that? Would you call them an edge rider? I would. There are many, many large companies that do this every day. They say it in their privacy policies, which nobody reads. Go to the Obama-Biden privacy policy. Everything I have just said is in the Obama-Biden privacy policy. They take your data, they use your data, they buy other data, connect it to your data, they link it to your voter records, and they reserve the right to share all of those data with other organizations that are politically compatible. Now, is that an edge rider, or is that a mainstream provider? We could debate that, but I would bet that fewer than 70% of the people who go to that site even touch the words privacy policy.
Chris?
Yeah, let me just jump in. One of the things I wanted to say earlier, and I'm glad Joe brought this up, I think improved transparency, improved notice is important, but I don't think that's the answer to all the issues that we're discussing. Lengthy privacy policies have proven to be largely ineffective in giving consumers the information they need to make choices. And that's where I think DAA and NAI have been working on the icon-based approach to give consumers a better way to access information they need to make decisions. Those developments are a good thing. But even improving notice is not sufficient. I think consumer education is important. I think giving consumers access to certain information is important. There are companies now, for example, that will provide you with access to your buckets. How are you categorized? What interests does the company have about you? And you can modify those interests, or you can opt out entirely. Having companies think about data retention limits and data security is also very important, so that on the front end, before you start developing a new product or service, think about what you need to collect, whether you need to collect everything that you're contemplating collecting. And that's a more fulsome approach to these issues than just giving people better notice.
Can I just say something? On the train coming up this morning, I was trying to write for consumer, I think it's consumer protection, I don't know, Consumer Privacy Week or something. There is a week coming up where we're going to try to work to educate consumers more about our program and about their choice. And I was trying to write in grab the consumer attention, simple language, something about their choice, notice and choice, where to find it, how to interpret it, and how to exercise it. And let me tell you, it's very difficult. With the best will in the world, you've got to be able to get the consumer engaged, get this consumer to read something when the consumer is on the website to do something else. And we think that, people say, Joe, you just said, well, nobody clicks on the icon. Anyone who's doing targeted advertisement in this room would be very pleased to have our click-through rate. But what happens often when a consumer does click through, and this is a point I'd make about how these things evolve. When it started, people were giving you a very simple, short notice and choice. Now you can choose to go on, look at the buckets, as Chris said, that are being collected about you, and change them if you wish. And the experience of the approved providers who are providing this is just what it is for Google and Yahoo. People don't opt out, they fiddle with their profile to make it more accurate. And I think that that says something about what consumers really want. And some of them, because consumers vary all over the place. Some people don't want to know anything. Some people are horrified by the idea that they're served ads at all. But some consumers actually want to know in a granular way what Joe says they should know to be respected. They want to know what's being collected about them, and they want to have the ability to change that if it's wrong.
I'm glad Joe raised the use of this very granular data for political purposes, because I think it shows that the stakes here in the debate about online privacy are much higher than just how to sell a Dorito. There are other fundamental rights at play here, and so although I do not at all deny that consumers don't like what's happening with their data and want to control their data, that impulse runs in direct conflict with other very important interests, social interests, public interests in letting the data create knowledge and allowing politicians to capitalize on that. Now, if a politician finds that consumers are so bothered by this, consumers, voters, people are so bothered by this that they would rather forgo the ability to target particular voters, well, then that's fine. They can advertise on that basis. They can say, I am the politician that sends you dumb ads. I don't, but I think there's probably a reason we don't see a market for politicians the way that we see a market for advertisers that want to.
But I think, though, part of Joe's point is that consumers, they're not going to know that they're even bothered by it. They might be bothered by it if they knew why they were getting the ad. But if they don't know why they're getting the ad, then they're not going to know that they're bothered by that level of targeting because they don't realize that they've been targeted in that way. I mean,
also, companies are now being much more smart about how they do this. So, for example, some firms, I think this was mentioned in the Times article about Target, have begun to say if we specify things to people too frequently, they're going to freak out. So what we'll do is we'll send them a melange of ads, including the things we really want to target them about, so that it softens the blow, as it were. There are lots of ways to handle the notion of targeting and return on investment. And the issue here, to me, is how do we get the next generation to engage with the idea of their definitions in the digital world? There are kids growing up, the students that I have no clue about this. They know they're being targeted. They're just like their parents. We've done research on this too. If you get 18 to 24-year-olds, national sample, and ask them in kind of a very private, rational way, what do you think about privacy? They're going to give the same answers, the same cautions as older people. Then they may go on Facebook and do crazy things. Okay? But one is not necessarily contradictory to the other because of the way people behave. People want to go online and do things. They have to. And most privacy policies are basically tough luck. If you want to go to Google and you don't like Google's privacy policy, what are you going to do? Go to Bing? Now, Bing is going to say, we're better than Google for privacy, but essentially it's not all that different. Go to Yahoo. Wow. Then you're back in Bing.
Go to DuckDuckGo.
Well, okay, now I haven't read their privacy policy, but there are some ways, 90% of the people basically think about Google and maybe Bing. And my point is that we have to go beyond that to say you can engage with your data. The more people can go into those buckets and not just change things, but find out where things come from. How does this trail happen? Why am I a soccer mom? This gets into some proprietary issues, I know, and some difficulties of presenting it. But it can be done, and there are ways to think through the proprietary problems. Okay? But the next generation has to engage with the data for it to be concerned, cautious, and liberating about it. People will accept what you do if they have real choice.
Go ahead.
And I was just going to say that becomes far more complicated when you're talking about the mobile environment, which is where a lot of, the teenagers and the folks who are younger than those of us on the panel are really involved. And I was happy to hear Mark earlier today say that the NAI is considering taking a fresh look at the code to look more at mobile issues. We just had a survey released recently that indicated that hundreds of apps, mobile apps, available and apparently targeted to kids on smartphones, offered no information at all about their information collection and sharing practices. So getting folks to engage and providing the information that's necessary and giving the choice that's necessary in the mobile environment is going to be, I think, an important priority for industry as a whole going forward.
Well, we're working on it. I'm on the DAA mobile subcommittee, and I will just tell you, we are trying to do it. We have everyone at the table who is in this ecosystem and trying to give notice on the small screen that is meaningful, real time, but not a clutter, and make sure that it is delivered by the party responsible is a tough one, but we are working on it.
So, Chris, one thing that companies almost always say is, we don't collect personally identifiable information, so there's really no cause for worry about privacy, even if we're collecting data that you thought we weren't collecting, as happened last week when news broke about the Safari workaround. We weren't collecting anything personal. On mobile phones even, people say, like, well, we might have a unique device identifier, but we're not collecting your name, so it's not personally identifiable. What is the FTC's kind of position on whether this information should be considered anonymous or?
Well, it depends on the information you're talking about. What we have said is that the distinction between personally identifiable information and non-identifiable information is diminishing. I mean, once you have enough data points, it's pretty easy to link an individual to a name, or link a browser to a name. But what we've also said is it's not necessary for the individual to be named in order for there to be concerns about inadequate notice or choice or insufficient privacy protections. I think the analogy that's often used in hearings on Capitol Hill, for example, is, I'm walking through a mall and, Jeannie is trailing behind me by 10 feet, watching everything I do in the shopping mall. She may not know my name, but she knows a lot about my practices and may be using information about my practices to engage with me or make decisions about me in ways that, perhaps I should know more about. There should be more transparency about. And I should have an option of keeping Jeannie away from me in the mall.
But you might have a good bargain that I want.
Well, and that's where that's where at least providing the transparency
Right.
and telling consumers there are benefits associated with this practice makes sense.
Let me ask, this is for everyone on the panel, but let me start with Jane. Are there ever times when you, kind of as a consumer, are online and see something, either an ad or content or something else that makes you think that your privacy has been compromised?
Well, I certainly have had the experience of being online and seeing an ad for something I just looked at the day before and making the connection and feeling bothered by it. And as I said at the very beginning of this panel, I do think that there are some instances when collection is so granular that it doesn't match the expectations, the reasonable expectations that people have when they're just using the internet to browse, to shop or browse. On the other hand, the fact that I am weirded out by it, I don't think should be, sorry, I don't think that the fact that I have been creeped out by it should guide what the law requires companies to do. So I do want to make that separation clear.
Well, Joe, what about you?
About a month or so ago.
Microphone.
Oh, sorry. About a month or so ago, I was getting several days of ads, maybe more than that, that included my age and ads around social dating continually. And some of them were just my age, ads that knew around how old I am, and ads that linked my age to social dating, wanted me to go to a dating site and stuff like that. And it was, aside from the typical remarketing things that I often get, and it occurred to me that the reason for this was that one of my students is doing some research on social dating sites, and I went to the sites to look at the stuff. And as a consequence, they were making these connections. But I wanted to say, if I may, a couple of lines about this. We're talking here about the internet today, typically, or mobile. In not too many years, I'm sure you all know, this is going to be television. And now the stakes are much higher. It's going to be video advertising online, but it's going to be television. And already there's many technologies that allow, Visible World is one, different kinds of households to get different kinds of ads, even change the shows, the agendas you get. People will get different ideas about the world through television based upon what marketers know about them and their households, maybe even individuals in the households. Is this a kind of world that you want to happen without your knowledge and your ability to do something about it? I don't think that necessarily the answer is all in laws. I think there should be a ground basis of laws, but I think marketers have to begin to realize that there's a public interest here that people have to contend with. For 100 years, marketers have approached the media in a kind of laissez-faire way. We do what's good for us and it sort of works out. The media system is upending now in ways that I think marketers are beginning to be very concerned about, with content farms, with newspapers that have historically done well tanking, and other kinds of situations. I don't know an easy answer, but the combination of television, targeting, the ability to change video ads on the fly, and the restructuring of the media system ought to give marketers pause about what's going on.
Chris, what about you? Ever, as a consumer, been kind of troubled by what you see?
You know, this hits at I think an important point that is, you know, it is subjective, and whether I've been sort of freaked out or seen anything that's surprising doesn't necessarily translate into someone else's experience. I can say that, you know, I've seen ads that I get, and it makes me wonder what else is out there, what other information has been or is being collected about me. And it raises a question about, you know, what is going on. And that's even more true on mobile devices. You have so many different players in the ecosystem. I don't think anyone has any idea how the information flows occur on mobile devices between operating system providers, handset manufacturers, ad networks, app developers, service providers. And sort of, you know, making that clear is going to be challenging.
What about you, Jeannie?
Well, first of all, every time I look at my kitchen floor, I am very grateful for targeting advertisements, because that's how I found the most beautiful tile in the world at an inexpensive price. So thank you all. I have to say that I must have a higher tolerance, but even FTC commissioners are now saying they like getting targeted ads. And I have to say it goes to something that Jane said. When I first saw on Amazon, people who bought what you bought may also like something or whatever, I was just, how did they know that? What is this? Now I got annoyed the other day because I was looking at books and the people who like this also bought didn't come up. And I was actually looking, I didn't like the book I got, so I was looking to see what in that area was being written. Now, on the other hand, I'm very sensitive about mobile apps. My Android system lets me, before I download an app, look at what it wants to collect about me. And there have been a number of times when I've said, hey, this app doesn't need my address book.
And it might have taken it anyway.
Well, if it takes it anyway, and I'm supposed to be able to know that, then I would turn to my friend that I track in the shopping center and ask him for some help.
Joe?
I just wanted to say that Amazon is a great example of you see it, but you don't see it. Amazon makes it seem like it's transparent. You know, people who bought this, like you, also bought this. Check out the Amazon privacy policy. They are sharing your data and using your data in ways that you would never imagine based upon what they say about people who bought this also bought that. Pandora does the same thing. So again, it's kind of sense where you're getting lulled. And I wonder, I don't know if anyone's ever asked the FTC this, when there are so many privacy policies that start with, we really care about your information, you know, and security. The more you read down the paragraphs, the more you realize how much they share. Is that considered deceptive? If the first paragraph says we really care about your information and we'll, you know, take care of it, and then they go ahead and it's a sieve, is that a deceptive comment?
There have been a number of cases where statements have been made in privacy policies that are contradicted by statements elsewhere. I think the best example is probably the Facebook case that we reached a settlement on recently. You know, the privacy policy has a lot of statements, but we focused on the privacy settings and a wizard that Facebook used to roll out new settings. Those were more in-your-face disclosures to consumers that misled them into believing certain
That was
things.
where Facebook basically changed everyone's default settings so that they were sharing more information by default than what they signed up with. Right?
Yeah, but it also had to do with the fact that there was inadequate disclosure of what the changes meant.
Right. So,
We have a question?
yes. Up in the front? I'm sorry. Oh. Okay, sorry, I couldn't see.
So I had a question regarding how the FTC balances security and privacy, particularly going back to your mall analogy where you now have retail stores using security video to measure and monitor consumer behavior in their response to merchandising. And then when that consumer makes a purchase, they actually tie that individual to that individual's image. And I'm curious, how do you measure, you know, is that a violation of my privacy, and can I ask Nordstrom's to turn off the security cameras?
Yeah, I have to be careful about talking about specific practices and specific companies unless, you know, we already have some sort of public action involving them. We did have a workshop recently on facial detection and facial recognition where we explored some of these issues. And I think I can say there is a significant concern about use of cameras, linking images to identity and to activity, purchasing behavior, or other behavior, without an ability to disclose that to the individuals who may be in the store. That's an issue that a number of folks raised significant concerns about in our workshop, and you know, we keep hearing more and more about. So thinking about ways, if you're going to link that data, to make sure you give people enough information so that they can exercise choices about it, I think is important.
Hey, I'm Sophie Clara, I'm working for Huge. I wonder if you see, with the trends that you see coming in from consumers, you see an opportunity that a privacy policy ever becomes a differentiator for a company, meaning two companies have the same product, but one has a privacy policy that is more friendly towards consumers. Do you ever see that becoming a differentiator, or are we just going down the path and that's it?
We hope to see that as a differentiator, and we have seen that in some instances in terms of data retention, in terms of, there's a social media site out there that's very privacy protective. I think we'd like to see more competition on the privacy side, and more instances of disclosures or practices differentiating companies.
What I'd like to add is that some brands, in terms of the icon delivery and DAA program, already do see that, and they are spending their money rather than leaving it up to the ad network to deliver the icon and keep their control and dialogue with the customer, telling the customer that they are providing X, Y, and Z. So if they're going to pay for it, they must think it's valuable.
Hey. My name is Jay Shaw. I'm a freelance connection planner. And I have a question. Why is this not applicable to the offline world? I mean, list developers have been selling lists for years, forever. And I can give an example. I had a subscription to Fortune magazine that had a typo in it. You would not believe the mail I got with that typo. And that's going on probably more offline than online, but nobody's objecting.
Yeah, so I've always thought that the principles that we build should be media neutral, and whether you're online or offline, our privacy should be protected in the same way. And actually, if I could connect your question to the very first one we got, there's an old case where Ralph Nader brought a case against GM. I don't know if anyone's familiar with this case, but GM for a while was trying to intimidate him out of publishing his book, and so they had agents follow him around everywhere, and he was in public, and usually the rule is if you're in public, then people can observe, but their efforts to observe him just were too aggressive, and the New York Court of Appeals decided that that his privacy was violated, despite the fact that he was in public. He was, that they looked at him getting money from a bank teller, and that sort of very detail was just too much. And so we can imagine this, if you like the Nader theory of how, of data collection being too aggressive, whether you're in the real space or online space, then there ought to be plenty of symmetry there.
I agree with you. I mean, supermarkets collect more data than probably most organizations, and the connection between online and offline is the terms are disappearing. I don't think we should make distinctions, because the porosity of data, the movement across those divides, is such now that to make a distinction between online and offline, I think, is just inaccurate. It doesn't work anymore. It's happening all over the place.
Tony Jarvis, Olympic Media Consultancy. Doctors, Joseph and Jane, you identified that marketers must embrace the public interest. And I think that was echoed in yesterday's Parallel conference, in that, in fact, voting manipulation and connection of data was raised. And even worse, the power of the computer in Syria, North Korea, and China was also raised. So if marketers should embrace the public interest, would one way we as marketers can protect the value of the consumer is move to an opt-in mode rather than opt-out mode?
Well, I think opt-in is a great idea. It's complicated. In some cases, it may be very difficult, for example, in the mobile situation. The question is, what are the mechanisms? But philosophically, I think that's the way to go, particularly when you're dealing with people's data that are persistent. I think that it is a problem that marketers resist that tremendously. I know that in Europe, they're moving in that direction. And the US is trying to create kind of safe harbors around this issue. But I think in the end, opt-in is what it should be about because, again, I believe people should have a sense of how their data are used and a sense of their control over them.
And I'll go exactly the other way. Yeah, so I I do think that ultimately what we want here is whatever's best for the public interest, but giving people control over their information, the flow of it, and how it's used, that essentially makes a property type of right in facts. And so I prefer, I mean, what I really like about the American system as opposed to the European system is that our roots are in tort law, where we have to ask whether there was harm and whether the harm can be justified by other competing benefits. And so I think control is the most
that my concern of harm is different. See, so I understand exactly where you're coming from, but to me, harm is not just can you get hurt financially or health-wise or something very tangible. I think harm is to the larger society and to the way in which we think of ourselves and our relationship to others. And this is a really important sense of where we're going in society. So I think from that standpoint of harm, opt-in is a healthy way to go for a society.
Oh. Could I just take off my self-regulatory program hat and say something that is I feel this very much, and that is what you think depends on where you sit. And if you think that advertising and data collection are somehow something that people need to be shielded from, then you want to erect an opt-in barrier. If you think that people are mature enough to exercise choice when they have real-time notice, then except for things where the society has made a judgment that they're sensitive and you need to know and consider before that data is collected, then you are more likely to favor the system that we have now. My belief is that if you start throwing screens up with, do you want to opt in 1,000,000 times for any cookie that ever came your way, except for one that you need for product fulfillment or security, you are not doing consumers any favors. But if you give them an opt-in in the situation like the Facebook change, where it's something they never agreed to, never could have read, then I think you are protecting them better than making a decision for them that they need to be warned before they get an ad or have a cookie collected. And that was my own personal opinion. So.
Okay. Well, I think we're out of time, so thank you all very much.